What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony. Find me on Twitter at __Ant. That's pro 2 ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage, I am joined by one of my favorite guests to really do a full-scale wide receiver episode coming out of the NFL Combine. Wide receiver, obviously a position of need for the Buffalo Bills this offseason, and a position that a lot of fans are clamoring for to be addressed with that 28th pick in the first round. And there's depth at this position group. There's top tier talent at this position group. And the NFL Combine did not disappoint when it came to guys at this spot really being able to show out in a variety of forms and fashions. And that may potentially tip the scales in the favor of some or in the non-favor of others in terms of some moving, some shaking, some risers, some fallers. We got some questions we're going to go through and dive into in tonight's episode, all within the framework of kind of tiering and ranking this wide receiver group and kind of starting to put things into perspective in terms of the draft board for the Bills and the NFL in general as free agency kicks off next week and really starts to finalize what teams' boards and needs are going to look like. But as I mentioned, I'm joined by one of my favorite guests. I think it's your fourth time on the show. I kind of lost track at this point, but Mr. JP Acosta of SB Nation, trendsetter, just jet setter, hitting all these awesome events as the season is winding down, mad famous now. Like you're just everywhere. But when you're here, like I said, you are one of my favorite people just with how you cover the game, your love for wrestling and anime and Disney World and all that kind of stuff. You're awesome. I appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on again. It feels like we're kind of hitting the home stretch of the NFL offseason, where free agency is starting up. We got the draft. We got the combine out the way, which feels like a major cross off the list. I'm just ready for a vacation. That's really what we're headed towards. I know as soon as we file that last draft report, I am headed somewhere where I'm not thinking about work, but I'm happy to be back on.
I'm in a similar boat with once, I love this time of year, but once the draft is done, that's Sunday. I'm just like, oh, and then I'm like, no, wait, I got to put together stuff for who the Bills took and all these things that happen. And then it's that next week after that I'm like, I might take a 2-week break. I'm so burnt out and even more for you because you do this full time. Actually, kind of speaking of that, what's everywhere you've been and everything you've done, what is the Myles Garrett thing was pretty cool, but what's been your favorite experience over the last month or so for you? Because you've had a lot of the Penix stuff was all just what was your favorite thing? Because your Twitter has been rolling. You've been just having so many awesome moments. What's been the best thing for you?
I think my favorite thing was talking about anime with players at the Super Bowl at Radio Row. Was there for work, was working with RJ Ochoa, who runs Blogging the Voice for us. We did podcast hits, and we talked with Myles Garrett, of course, and we talked about anime for a good 5 minutes after. If you want to know, when he was talking about when in the first round of playoffs they played the Texans, and he said Myles Garrett Hunter Association, he was talking about Hunter x Hunter and not solo leveling. I asked him about it. He let me know. He also said Vinland Saga is one of his favorite animes ever. So wow. if you want a recommendation straight from Myles Garrett, it's that one. Was talking with Jamal Williams as well. Wore a Power Rangers shirt to the interview, which was fantastic. And we talked about Attack on Titan, which is one of my favorite animes ever. So it's just those moments where you get to talk with guys about things that had nothing to do with football. I figured out Kirk Cousins is a huge Disney World fan. We talked about Disney World for a long time. He said his favorite park, was Epcot, but it could change at any different.
That's on brand for him, though. Epcot's sweet, but I totally see that as on brand for Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, he's a parent with kids. He's got kids, and he needs to get somewhere where he can walk around, let them stretch their legs out. Epcot definitely makes a lot of sense. I was able to ask him about the NFL honors dance. So just being able to do those things and kind of ask some questions that had nothing to do with football was really fun to me.
It's always those little non-expected moments that you don't expect. My I've been at the Senior Bowl the past 2 years now, and my favorite experience was last year at the end of the afternoon practice on that first Tuesday. Tony Khan was there, and I walked up to Tony Khan, and just like nobody was talking to him because nobody in the football circles probably care that he's there. And he was wearing an AEW shirt, and I walked up and just like introduced myself and said like, you know, how much I appreciated what he did for like wrestling here and starting AEW and that. And I went to go leave, and he like pulled me back, and we talked wrestling for like 15 minutes. And then we're talking about like, Jay Briscoe had passed like recently at that time. We were talking about them and their history and their dad who played in the NFL. And like, it was such an awesome time. And like, people were always like, man, like, what's your favorite part of the Senior Bowl? I was like, talking wrestling with Tony Khan. And they're like, no, Senior Bowl. I'm like, yeah, talking wrestling with Tony Khan. Like, it's just those little nuggets.
Yeah, like last year I was there and I was able to talk with Will McDonald about anime for like 20 minutes. He was wearing a Hunter x Hunter hoodie, and that just spawned a completely different conversation that we had for like 20 minutes after. It was a group of writers who all loved anime. We talked about literally like every single anime he was watching. He said he loved Demon Slayer. He actually said he was going to get a tattoo of the other main character from Hunter x Hunter, Gon Freaks, on his arm, because we already had one of Killua.
That's sick.
When the last time we talked. So I'm hoping he got that second tattoo. Of course, with NFL money, you probably do.
Right.
But
fair enough.
I'm hoping to get a story up off the ground at SB Nation, hopefully in the future, about the connection between the NFL players and anime, because it was a lot bigger of a crossover than you think.
And those are the cool things too. Like, I guess at least for me, like you see these people who like play, like famous people in general, like movie stars and like celebrities and professional athletes. Like, at the end of the day, like, they're still people, and they still like the regular things that like you do. And it's cool just to like, see those experiences and have those experiences. I remember one of the dudes who I was there with last year from Cover One, like his opening question for everybody at the combine was like, who wins in a fight, Godzilla or King Kong? And there were so many dudes that really got into it. And I was like, oh, you're really like into King Kong, Godzilla and the Monsterverse. Like, this is pretty sick. And yeah, just the way they like open up as people. And again, that's part of the reason why I love the work that you do. Like, ball, you break down tape, but then your ability to kind of like make these other types of connections. Like, you operate in a space from a ball knowing perspective, and also from like an entertainment crossover perspective that not a lot of people operate in, or operate in more of a clunky fashion, and you just crush it. And so I think that's awesome that you had those experiences and be able to put some pen to paper, or I guess keyboard to, I don't know, whatever the digital equivalent of that is. But let's transition now to the conversation we have on tap here. This wide receiver class, as I talked about in the intro, very deep, very loaded, tremendous top tier talent, a lot of value in round 2, in round 3, even potentially on day 3, with where you can go and what you can see and what can happen. An eventful NFL combine. We saw a 40-time record break. We saw some dudes shut it down. We saw some guys not perform. A lot of moving and shaking potentially happening for this wide receiver grouping. And so we have some preset questions here for you here, JP, and you and I will go back and forth. And also for everybody playing at home, the questions that I'm bringing up that JP and I are going to dive into, feel free, throw them up into the chat every time I pull one up. So this first one, which wide receiver helped themselves the most at the combine? If you are watching with us live, feel free to give your answer. Feel free to tell me and JP why our answers suck, or whatever have you, whatever's on your mind. JP, the floor is yours with this first question. Which wide receiver do you think helped themselves the most with their performance at this past weekend's NFL Combine?
So obviously, I think everybody wants to go to Xavier Worthy, who did break the combine record in 4.21 seconds, which is still unbelievable to think about. Like, that number actually would go. But the guy that I'm going to shout out first is Ricky Pearsall from Florida. He's a guy that I studied before we got into the Senior Bowl. I was like, oh, okay, this guy's good, because I thought last year, I made a joke last year when Anthony Richardson was there. Ricky Pearsall had the funniest wide receiver aesthetic to actual play ratio, where he looked awesome. He had the best drip of any receiver in college football, but the play didn't really equal it. This year, he really that level of play really rose. And what I really needed to see from him at the combine was that speed, that long speed. Because sometimes on film, it looked like he was kind of on cruise control because of how smooth he looks as a receiver. But running in the low 4.4s in the 40, doing great in the shuttles and the L drills, and then jumping 42 inches. This dude was a legit athlete on top of being a great separator in the intermediate, like middle of the field range.
Mm,
I would easily take him on day 2. That's one of those guys who you put him in kind of a. I think the best fit for him is kind of that Shanahan style offense or
good
Shanahan
call.
style like offense where he can be a good number 2 next to an outside receiver. The first thought was Atlanta, and you just get him next to Drake London and let him be kind of the slot machine receiver.
Nice.
But another guy that I really thought had a good day was Xavier Legette. I was
Oh,
a little concerned about how he would run because I didn't see him pull away from guys a lot on tape. But then he busts off a 4.39, and I'm like, oh, all right, man, excuse me. At
there it
6'1",
is.
227 pounds, I'm like, word, man. I thought you were going to run 4.5. So excuse the heck out of me. Let me go back and watch. But he's another one of those guys where you just want to get the ball in his hands and see what happens. I think he is right now, he's a yak, but also a deep guy. So he's kind of, he is the 2016 Houston Rockets as a receiver. Where
Nice.
it's either layups or 3-pointers.
That's it. Nothing in between.
You can get that profile at 6'1", 227. You can turn it into something because you are that big and you are that fast and you are that strong as a receiver. There's not a lot of guys who are like that. And then my wide receiver 2 going in, Rome Odunze, had a great day. Just a smooth route runner. He never looks like he's running out of his own pace.
That gauntlet drill looked like it was done by AI. Like they did the tracer and it doesn't move from the line. It's ridiculous.
Textbook. And it just, every time you watch him play, it never looks like he's sped up. He looks like, again, I'm going to go to the NBA here. It's very Shai Gilgeous-Alexander-ish, where he's never put off out of his pace or out of his own style of play, and he can just create. He's a great creator after the catch. He's got wonderful downfield ball tracking ability. He's my wide receiver 2 going. He was my wide receiver 2 going in. He's my wide receiver 2 leaving. And really, just overall, every one of these receivers had something where you're like, oh, I can see that. I can see that. Like, if you need a receiver, this is a draft to get at least 1 to 2 of them.
That's a great way to put it. And yeah, there were so many, like, there was almost something positive to hang your hat on for almost like every wide receiver, which is what made like the tiering conversation so interesting, especially as we go forward here. I also love like how many, so I'm a Clippers fan, and I love how many references are tying to the Clippers right now. So you got the 2016 Rockets, so Harden's there now with the Clippers. And then I was fine with it at the time, but not really. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was like the main trade piece that went to Oklahoma City to bring Paul George to the Clippers. And I know that's what Kawhi wanted, but I really was like, no, like just let Shai cook for a little bit. He's going to be so good. And to watch what he's doing, I was watching the game. What was it, Sunday night against Phoenix or Saturday night against Phoenix?
It was
Phoenix starts to come back, and they put Shai back in. And he's like, no, I'm just going to penetrate and hit, jumpers and elbows. He's cutting off stuff. He's running the offense. Oh, it's just so beautiful. I thought it was funny how that tied in. It's shocking that I got off track. I don't know why I'm surprised. I like the names that you picked. And Ricky, just to kind of piggyback on that, I wasn't expecting a 4.41 from him. I didn't know what he would run. No. And his tape for me was interesting. Like he was an early watch for me, heading into the Senior Bowl, because he was there at the Senior Bowl. And it was weird. Like he didn't have, I say that he plays with technical fluidity because he's a good route runner. Like he knows how to run routes, but there's not a ton of like sharpness or suddenness, but it's all very like, he just moves and flows, and he's creating separation and he's getting open. So it's like precise, but it's fluid and it's smooth. And he had a very good Senior Bowl, but he was somebody that I was like, probably like a 4.51, maybe like a 4.48, but he like almost 4.41. That's almost sub 4.4. I was not anticipating that for him at all. And that's a huge boon for him, considering the hands that he has, the ball tracking that he has, the route running, like just an awesome performance for him at the combine. And I like the Legette pick as well. He was someone I was excited to see at the Senior Bowl. He had a rough day 1, a better day 2. I think he was also potentially banged up because he had a wrap on his leg. That's just me speculating. But he didn't perform how I had hoped he would perform. But he looked the part. Like he looks like baby A.J. Brown. Dude is yoked up. He's fast. He's athletic. He's big. He's cut. It was nice to see him perform at the combine the way he should perform at the combine. The combine is the event that's like made for like an Xavier Leggett, the dude who looks great in the spandex and the tight shirt, who runs real fast, who crushes all the drills. He very much looks the part. And I think if you are, granted, he's got that 1 year of production, but when you watch the tape, yeah, the route running necessarily isn't always there, but there's a lot to work with from the size and the speed and the athleticism, the physicality. Like there's a good baseline of traits from which you can operate in terms of coaching up. So I love those 2 picks from you. Similar to one from me, I'm going to start with Ladd McConkey. I was not expecting sub 4.4, similar to like Ricky's time. That's when I was like, what's going on here? Do we have like quick trigger fingers with 40? I was like, because Ricky's running a 4.41, Ladd's running a 4.39, like Xavier Worthy's breaking records. AD Mitchell ran what he ran. Like, I was like, and I didn't think Ladd was slow. Like I thought he'd run in the mid 4.4s, like 4.45, like a 4.44 to 4.47, I thought would be his range.
Yeah.
Just watching him on tape and then seeing him at the Senior Bowl, he's just faster than he gets credit for. But I was not expecting a sub 4.4. And I think he helped himself so much. Similar to Ricky, I think he, aside from the big 3, so a lot of this conversation, I want to put that for everybody. Like, I know you mentioned Odunze, but like some of the things I'm saying, I'm not talking about Marvin Harrison and Neighbors and Odunze because they're probably the best at like any one thing you're mentioning. Like, and so I'm going to leave them out of the conversation at this point. But Ladd and Ricky are definitely easily in that conversation for the best route runner, like in this draft class. And I think Ladd might have him by a little bit just because of the sharpness and the suddenness and the deception he operates with. But then he's also pushing sub 4.4. I just wasn't expecting that from his game. And that's nice when you also watch him at Georgia and see how much he plays on the outside. And then it's like, okay, like, he's 5'11", like mid 180s. He's not going to be, a ball winner downfield, but he can separate with speed. He can separate with route running. He knows how to separate at the release off the line, in the stem, at the break. He's got a route. I posted it a couple days ago against Florida. He's just running it deep over, but he runs it. And then at 10 yards, he stems it vertical for 2 snaps and then snaps it off and is just wide open. Like he just knows how to win. He's a professional route runner. And so to see the physical speed go with it and not be like, yeah, he's a great route runner, but he runs a 4.55. Like I thought that was huge for him. And similar, I'm going to go to the other Texas receiver. Obviously Xavier Worthy helped himself with that record setting performance, but AD Mitchell, somebody who I really like the traits and the ball winning downfield and the explosiveness, but there's just so many weird reps for him on tape where it looks like, and he almost kind of said it as much, where he says like he never runs routes at full speed, which was kind of weird. But he runs routes where it just looks so lazy and effortless. And he's just kind of doing whatever. And then he puts his foot in the ground and bang, like he just explodes and creates like 3 to 5 yards of separation. He's got this lower body fluidity and flexion and flexibility that allows him to and I keep saying it, like almost like recoil. Like you can watch him weight transfer everything from the ground up and then snap it through. And it's also interesting watching him run routes on the same field as Xavier Worthy, because Worthy runs a lot of what he does at full speed. Like he's attacking cushion and leverage right out of the gate. And Mitchell doesn't do that. But you can watch them on opposite sides of the field, granted one's off the line and one's on the line, but they're almost neck and neck. So it's not like Mitchell is slow. And even when it looks like he's not putting in any effort, he's still just so much more athletic and faster, but he's so smooth and so pliable in a lot of ways. But to get that timed 40 for him, being in that 4.3 and matching it with the traits, I thought he's somebody who really kind of put himself, if he wasn't already, into that conversation further in terms of what you can work with, given his size, his frame, his weight, the athleticism, the explosion. And like everything for me at the combine is you're really trying to quantify what you see on tape, or something's trying to catch your eye to be like, you know what, I didn't notice that. Let me go back to the tape and watch. And I think Mitchell is one who had a combine that really did a good job of quantifying the athleticism and the explosion you see on tape.
Yeah, I think with Mitchell, the thing that I kind of wrote down, and it's kind of the same thing as with that second tier of receivers. So Brian Thomas Jr., AD Mitchell, Keon Coleman. Yep. The route running is sort of vibey.
Yes.
It's more just, okay, we'll just go run over here. We'll break this off here. And AD Mitchell certainly comes off his route running and the style of play, like you said, he kind of just vibes out there. But when he's on, there are few better in terms of high pointing the ball,
Yeah.
in terms of being able to create separation as well.
Especially at the catch point. Like, he separates at the catch point with athletic. Like, he can dunk on dudes.
When you can do that and you can also win in the in-between game, you're like, oh, okay, I see it now. I see what you're getting at here. He really helped himself with that 4-3-5. After that, you really could have done, like, he doesn't have to do anything else.
No.
We're good here. Like, all right. Like, it's like Xavier Worthy running the 4-2-1. I don't have to do anything else. Like, we can shut this down. Another guy that I thought really had a great day was Johnny Wilson from Florida State, busting off a 4.51
Right.
at 6'6", 230 pounds, and then having I believe the third highest short shuttle of all receivers there.
Makes no sense. It's because he takes like two steps and he's done.
Yeah, the fourth highest short shuttle at 4.11 seconds at 6'6", 230. I was like, excuse the hell out of me, Johnny Wilson. I thought he was going to turn like a submarine, but no, like, this dude can move, and that's something you didn't really see on tape, right, in his ability to change direction. But you think about a guy who can be 6'6" and 230 pounds and be the inside outside guy, like, okay, like, you can talk yourself into that, especially if he can move like he does at that size.
That's a great call. I feel like he and Coleman, I feel like have become like kind of like the warts of like the top, or like the wide receiver class, especially Coleman being closer to the top tier. Like, I feel like people find reasons to not like them, and I understand. But with Wilson, it was interesting. Like, I'd see some stuff on tape, especially earlier in the year, where he'd run like a hitch or an in-breaker, and I'd be like, he dips and sinks pretty well for a dude that's like a friggin' giant. And again, to be able to see that quantified with these times, like, this is like I mean, again, you're that size, you're gonna have a long torso and long legs, but he's got long legs. Like, he's a leggy dude. And to see him have that type of speed, but again, it's not just like, well, yeah, all he has is that straight line speed. No, he can kind of change direction and move a little bit. That's extremely intriguing because he's such a size mismatch on the outside. And you think of someone like who's got that size running a 4.5, that's going to play faster because each one of his strides are probably like 1.5 strides of whoever is covering him. And then he's got the arm length and the wingspan. Like, what do you do with that? I know there was so much of the conversation was like, move him to tight end because he's not going to be able to live on the outside. I think with his combine, he was like, no, like, I mean, if it's more profitable for me, sure, maybe I'm moving to tight end, but no, like, I can play wide receiver. And you see some of the pop on tape, and yeah, that combine piece, so helpful for him. I was not expecting it.
Yeah, you're thinking of Johnny Wilson. Realistically, he can be a power slot in the NFL, like a big slot who can maybe help out in the run blocking department, but you get him free releases where he's just basically like long striding out towards you. My comparison for him is the Iron Giant. You're just running at, it's just the Iron Giant running after you. That's and great. Now you're like, oh, like what am I supposed to do about him like running at me? And then he's got the longest arms ever recorded for a receiver at the combine. He causes so many mismatch problems that an NFL front office is going to go, oh, I can work with that.
Yep.
Like you don't see a lot of guys who are 6'6", 231 pounds who move like that, and you don't just go, oh, I don't think we can do anything here. Like there's something we can do here. Every coach has the belief that they can turn a guy into the greatest player ever. You can look at Johnny Wilson and just go, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, and especially like so much, not necessarily that it's changed versus like previous years or generations of football, but you get so many more teams and coaching staffs that go trait based on stuff. And they're like, you know what? The production, I don't care. Like, I can take that and I can mold that. Like, I can't teach someone to be big and rangy and long armed and fast and explosive. Like, I can maybe improve some of those things, but I can't teach that. Like, but you know what I can teach you? I can teach you some route running nuance, and I can teach you how to stem and all these pieces. And if you have those raw physical traits already, and again, that's very understandable. Like I understand coaching staffs and teams like kind of betting on themselves to be like, no, we can get the most blood out of that stone. And Johnny Wilson is one that, man, like there seems to be like a lot of interesting blood in that stone. Another one that I expected this one, but I thought he still did well. Brian Thomas Jr. just coming in,
gosh.
you know, right? Like measuring at basically 6'3", 209 pounds, and then running that 4.3 40. Like, and I also think he needed that. Like, he needed that quantifiable data, because you watch him on tape, you mentioned it kind of being in that vibey route running situation. Everything is pretty much like slot fades and just posts and like vertical stuff. It's basically just like, yo, you're big and fast. Go be big and fast. Either outrun whoever's covering you, or we're going to chuck it up and we want you to play above the rim and dunk on somebody at the catch point. And he does both of those things. But there were a couple times on tape where I saw him run like little hitches, and I saw the sink in his hips, and I was like, "Ooh, that's like interesting." Like, just these little nuggets along with the size and the speed. But he's that guy. He's another traits-based receiver. Like, you're looking at him and being like, I can't teach people to be big. I can't teach him to be fast. He's big. He's very fast. Like, the fact that he's running that 4.3 at 6'3", 209, basically 210 pounds, I think he really he's not my wide receiver 4, but I think he potentially vaulted himself into that wide receiver 4 spot for a lot of teams, because yes, you have to coach him up, but with that size and speed, he's a scheme fit almost anywhere.
Yeah, I think with Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, I think what's going to happen is you're going to have to throw out a few reps, because they kind of do the pick-a-side offense, where one side gets thrown the ball, the other side, you only have to run the route. You can just stand there and watch.
Dude,
it's like
so much. You could tell when it's not going to that side, because Thomas especially just come off and are just like, whatever. They're like, I'm not getting the ball, bro.
It's like you're playing pickup and you're just standing in the corner while the dude's just dribbling the ball out, trying to go onto an and one mixtape. You're just like, okay, I'm not getting the ball. I might as
You're
well.
Looking at your like nail, or pulling your phone out and scrolling, and he's like dribbling and everything.
He's trying to turn to Allen Iverson, and you're just over here like, yeah, I'm never getting this ball. But Brian Thomas is another example of a guy who, like you said, the route running is kind of vibey and it's a little limited of a route tree right now. But the things he does well, the hitches, the fades, the go balls, he does really well. If you get him in an offense right now, if you want a first-year contributor, which is what you're expecting as a first round pick, you get him in an offense that is exclusively we need you to do two things: run hitches and goes, and just be good at those things for now, and we will help you develop into a well-rounded receiver. I think in the mock draft I did this morning for work, I had him going to Indianapolis just because, look, it's real simple. Anthony Richardson can throw the ball a mile. Let's get him a receiver who can go run a mile and go catch the ball.
All you got to do, just go throw missiles and let him catch them.
Yeah, all you got to do is run fades, and hitch routes, and you are good. You're going to make money off of that. But Brian Thomas Jr. is another guy who I really think had a great combine, another guy who really stood out. I think Luke McCaffrey had a really good day, especially with running a 4.39, which is, I was a little surprised at the 4.39, but again, it's Christian McCaffrey's brother. You kind of expect being a good athlete there.
Yeah.
And then dominating the shuttle and the short and the L drill and the short shuttle, that matters a lot, especially in his case of being a slot only receiver who can create separation in the short areas. That matters for him, especially being a guy who came out of Rice. This receiver class is just so deep and so talented, and two of the top guys didn't work out, and we're still finding so much to talk about.
Yeah, there's I was just going through and taking a look at my notes again. Like, I like what Malik Washington ran, and I liked Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk, and really like every Washington. The Washington offense with their three receivers, and I also really like Westover, their tight end. Like, I don't think he gets enough appreciation. And then Dylan Johnson is fun. Like, there's just so many wide receivers anywhere. And this class is so deep to just literally dartboard throw, and you can probably say at least 3 positive things about whoever your dart lands on potentially. And that's why it is so deep and so fun to talk about, because this year I feel like more than ever you can really get a quality receiver on day 2, whether it's round 2 or even going into round 3. And it makes me think back to the 2019 draft, 2019 draft. Bills fans will hate this. The Bills took Cody Ford because they needed an offensive lineman in the second round. But that second round had Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel and DK Metcalf. And I think AJ Brown also went in that second round. There's going to be 5 receivers that go in round 2 that are going to be very good wide receiver 2s and potentially still have some wide receiver 1 upside. It's just wild how deep this class is from a usability standpoint. guys are going to be ranked differently based on what you're looking for from a skill set perspective, a scheme fit, frame, size, all that kind of stuff, as it always separates for teams. But there's so much to like here. Anybody else that you think really helped themselves at the combine?
So this is my day 3 guy at receiver who I'm willing to plant my flag for, and it is Holy Cross's Jalen Coker. He ran a 4.57 in the 40, but he had a 1.52 10-yard split. I'll take the 10-yard split. I'll take that. Also tied with Malik Washington for the highest vertical jump at 42.5 inches. He also jumped really well on the broad jump. That's his game. He is a above the rim receiver. He's not a great guy when it comes to wiggle or creating separation, but he can go up and get the ball. He goes up and gets it. He's a good blocker. I think that you're looking at, and again, a power slot, a fine wide receiver 3, but him being able to show like, yeah, I can do this at an NFL level. I have the vertical, I have the explosiveness to kind of be a go up and get the ball guy at 6'2", 209 pounds. Like, some team is going to be able to work with that.
My day 3 guy who didn't really test and I was disappointed about, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint from Georgia. Like, I think he's arguably the best blocking receiver in this draft. And then like he just, and it's not even just like, oh, he's in good position and he tries. Like, no, he puts dudes like in the dirt. Like, there's a rep against Tennessee where he takes the apex and literally puts him into the ground. Like, and he's fitting up on safeties and edges and popping them, which is fun. But then, sitting there at 6'1", like 200 pounds, he's got fluidity to his game. He's got athleticism. Like, he's a day 3 guy that I really do like. I was hoping he was going to test, but he really did not. But he falls into, again, more day 3 piece, but he's in this like whole back end of like the non-sexy receivers that I like with him and Malik Washington and Javon Baker, and Jalen McMillan. I like Jermaine Burton from Alabama. Like, he ran well. Like, there's so many, again, like, just dart throw and find a receiver that you like, and so many fun pieces to have. Now, opposite side of that conversation, the womp part of it, which wide receiver or wide receivers hurt themselves the most at this combine?
I know what I'm going to sound like when I know what people are going to say, like, you're poo-pooing a 4.4 140.
Troy Franklin.
But Troy Franklin's
4.4
140 being pinned also by a 1.61 10-yard split. I was like, that's weird. Like, he's not really getting out there. And then you think like you think about how he plays at Oregon. He's a long speed guy. He might not separate within those first 10 yards, but you can't keep up with him over the 20 or 30, which is his game. But then you go look at some of the jumps and the agilities, and it's like, oh, like, I was expecting a little bit better for a guy whose game is predicated on speed and explosiveness. And then you combine that with the drops, and I'm just like, I don't know, man. I want to believe. I really want to believe, but I think he kind of tops out as a specialist in the NFL, like a specialist receiver. Everybody can't be Isaiah Thomas on the Bad Boy Pistons. Somebody's got to be Rick Mahorn. Somebody's got to be Bill Laimbeer.
Yeah, you need a Laimbeer.
It feels like Troy Franklin can be kind of the Rick Mahorn of an offense. You might not be the focal point, or you might be like Vinny Johnson. You might be the microwave. You might get a few minutes here and there, but you know what you do in your role. And that's what I feel like Troy Franklin can be. Jamari Thrash, a guy that I was really high on coming into it, running a 4.46 was, again, I know how I'm going to sound poo-pooing a 4.46. That's really fast, but kind of expected him to run a little faster, especially for a guy who was supposed to be, again, vertical, deep threat. That is his style of play. But those are really like 2 receivers that I kind of picking a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like, we're being real nitpicky, like, oh, the 10-yard split isn't as good as what I hoped it would be. Like, that's feeling really like, oh, okay, like maybe this guy isn't as great. Jaquan Jackson having a 32-inch vertical jump. Jamari Thrash had a 34, which, again, a little like, oh, I don't know here. And those are really 3 guys I was kind of disappointed in how their day went. But I can see, like, their roles being kind of limited early on and throughout their career?
I'm going to start with Franklin. He's my top for this one. And this is a battle I've been fighting for maybe like the last like month on this show and just kind of on Twitter in general, because the conversation has gotten around Troy Franklin within like the Bills fan base that he's this complete receiver who can win anywhere and do anything on the field. And that's just not the case on tape. Like, he wins with that speed. Like you said, like, he can separate, he can stack dudes, but it's pretty much just pure speed that he wins with. He is not a very good route runner at this point. The thing I always go back to, he runs one of the ugliest whip routes I've ever seen in my life. And even when he's played against some of the upper tier, like the best corner he played against was Muhammad from Washington. And Muhammad gave him a lot of problems. And that was like, ooh, that's like not great. And I don't think, other than the speed, which is tremendous, like, because he's fast as hell on tape, like, I feel like he was kind of like a one-trick pony. And then just to watch him come into the combine, and again, 4.41, it's so funny that we're like knocking it, which is extremely fast. I thought he'd run somewhere in the 4.3s, and he ran a 4.4. And then he's listed at 6'3", 187, and he measured 6'1", 176. And then you watch him in drill, bro, like, the measurements weren't good. You mentioned the other times, and then even just watching him run drills, like watching him run routes, he looked very leggy and like not fluid. He looked uncomfortable. I know everybody's talking in the chat about the gauntlet drill, weaving all over the place. It looked like he was fighting the ball, and maybe there's something else going on. Maybe he was banged up in some way. Maybe there was something that was affecting him like mentally, and he wasn't on point that day, but he just did not perform well. It was ugly in a lot of ways. Again, like, ugly for a dude who ran a 4.41, but yeah, he's been put into that conversation of like, I see him as wide receiver 4 for people, or in that like next tier, or leading that next tier after the big 3. And I never really saw it on tape. Again, the speed is real. And I've understood Bills fans' love for him, because Bills fans want a speed threat, and you pop on the highlights and this guy is literally just outrunning everybody left and right. But with how Oregon's offense runs conceptually, and how well they take advantage of the wide hashes in college ball and taking advantage of that space, I feel like his game really took advantage of the college game. Like, dudes that just aren't as fast as him, and the game is so wide open spatially. I wondered how he would do when you have to play more technical, when the field shrinks, when there are guys that are against you who can match your speed or who can match physicality, or how do they play against him physically? Like, he's not a dude who dunks on people or who wins with physicality or runs through people. He's pure speed. And so the fact that he measured shorter, weighed less, and then ran a little slower, I already wasn't too high. Like, I had a second round grade on him, but it pushed him further down from like that tier perspective for me, just because I didn't think he showed out. Thrash is one for you that I find interesting. I didn't think he would run great. I was decently happy with the 4.46 because I think he's a good route runner, but I see him as more of like the underneath separator. Like, I don't see him as like that vertical guy that's going to push. Like, it is funny though. Like, I thought he'd run a little faster, and like Lad McConkey would run a little slower. And then to see McConkey blaze, and then like Thrash I was like, okay, this is good for Thrash. But in my head, I was like, I thought he could hit like 4.43 or like get closer to like the 4.4 piece, but his route running is cool. So I'm like, all right. But Troy Franklin, was the one to me for a guy whose calling card is speed, speed, speed. You were still fast, but a lot of dudes ran above you, especially like I always put him and Brian Thomas next to one another, because I think they're similar, like guys who need refinement in their route tree. But one is 6'3", 210 pounds. The other one was supposed to be 6'3", 187. But I thought the calling card would be like, Franklin's going to run faster. And now he didn't. So your calling card is speed, but you've got all these other guys that are bigger than you from a frame and weight perspective, running faster than you. I feel like his stock may have taken a dip, and maybe that benefits somebody on day 2 because he falls into the 50s or 60s or something. But I feel like he hurt himself a bunch.
Yeah, I also think with Xavier Worthy running a 4.21 at around the same height, weight, build as Troy Franklin also hurts his stock a little bit, because you think like, oh, these guys are the same build. You kind of have the same questions, but one guy is the fastest guy we've ever seen in the combine.
Ever.
So you're gonna know which one you're gonna draft. I want the guy that runs a 4.21, and it's not like we're saying this guy is going to be good and the 4.41 is not a good time. Like it's a good
Mhm.
time. But you think about the 161 10-yard split. You
Yeah,
think
that's
about
rough.
just coming in shorter and lighter than what was expected. And now you're kind of thinking, instead of being a super well-rounded receiver, you're thinking more, okay, this guy is a specialist at this point, because that's what he was kind of asked to do at Oregon, even when he had the wide open uh, offenses and the
Yeah.
air raid kind of helping him out a little bit.
And Worthy's such a good comp too, or an interesting person to bring up because, he came in and weighed 165. I feel like that was a combine weight. Like, I don't feel like he plays at 165. Like, I feel like come pro day or football time, he's weighing at least 170. But still, even if he bumps up to 170, 175, he's still probably running like a low 4.3. Like, oh no, he went from a 4.21 to a 4.31, which is still blazing. Like, who cares? But that's like a great point because Franklin came in smaller than you would have anticipated. I think Worthy came in from a weight perspective smaller than anticipated as well. But one guy set the combine record for the 40, crushed the shuttle to the point where he was like, I'm done. I'm putting on my sweatshirt and sweats. Like, you can interview me. I've had enough. Also, how cool was that? I think like he finished and like Jerry Rice and like Michael Irvin were talking to him. Like, that's just, man, what an experience for like these. Like, you just set the record, then you're talking to like two Hall of Famers. Like, so awesome. But yeah, like Franklin, I would have been okay if he came in like shorter and weighed less, but then yeah, ran like a 4.32 or a 4.31. I'd be like, oh, okay, like maybe that was some combine weight. But it's so funny to pair them together. I also think Worthy's a far better route runner, but that's a conversation for another time. Yeah, just like you would have thought if Franklin had an opportunity to run his fastest, it would have been at the weight that we saw him at, which scares me because I'm like, okay, well, does he play at 176? Because I didn't think he looked like 176 on tape. Like, I bought the mid 180s and thought he could even add more muscle onto his frame. But if you're running a 4.41 at 176, are you dropping to like a 4.45 if we put you into the mid 180s? And then all of a sudden your calling card becomes questionable against NFL corners who are also very fast, not to mention big and long and strong and are going to jam the hell out of you and beat the hell out of you in your stem.
Yeah, and I just wonder, with that frame, it's going to be really hard to live on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Troy Franklin, even with
The
that speed.
specialist is a great call. Like, I see somebody who's got to be, and then that's my worry too. Like, okay, if he's got to work more in the slot, I don't think he has the route running for it right now. So are you just running him on? Is he just straight pushing vertical out of the slot every single time? Or are you hoping like, hey man, watch for the blitzer, and if someone blitzes, sit down. But then he's going to catch the ball and get popped. Like, what's going to happen? It's just, well, yeah, what do you do with that niche or that specialized role like you're talking?
It feels like an insult now because of kind of his season and how it went. But Marquez Valdez-Scantling seemed like
Bro.
the comparison for Troy Franklin. But Marquez Valdez-Scantling, 6'4", 206
I
pounds.
was
That's
saying
what
he's
he
got
registered.
power slot ability. Like, you can use him
He's
as like
a
a block.
big dude who
Yes.
also ran a 4.37. Troy Franklin is not that. He's smaller, he's lighter, and he also ran slower. So now you're wondering, okay, this guy seems like he's going to be a little bit of a specialist. And that's fine if you
Yes.
want him to be a specialist, but you're wondering, can you get away with that in the first round? Can you get away with that being that guy? Like, I know we just said, like, with Brian Thomas, you want to have him in early and be a specialist, but there's a difference between, being a specialist at 6'3", 209
Yep.
and having that framework to build off of versus 6'1", 170 and also running slower.
Yes, because if you're, again, both guys, you're looking at like, okay, we have to teach them more of that route running technician piece to get to them to reach that ceiling. But if you're looking at the floors, Brian Thomas's floor, like at the end of the day, even if he's the worst route runner ever, you can and doesn't progress, you can still look at him and be like, well, he's really fast and he's pretty big. So he can either outrun somebody or we can throw him a jump ball. Franklin, at best, you were just hoping that he was going to be really fast and outrun everybody. And now that speed isn't really outrun everybody type of speed. It's so ridiculous to say, but like, because 4.41 again is fast, but for the NFL, like, not really. Like, there's a ton of dudes who run that. Like, so can you pull away? Yeah, he far surpassed everybody for me in terms of like somebody who really hurt themselves. Again, yeah, and then too, like not just the measurables, like how he performed in drills. Like, it takes a lot for someone to look poor in these drills, and he just looked clunky in his route running, and he looked like he was fighting the ball a lot. He just looked uncomfortable, which made me think, like, is he banged up? Is his mind somewhere else? Because he just looked, yeah, uncomfortable in an environment, in a setting, or maybe that had something to do with it too. Maybe the pressure of being on that stage, which I wouldn't think would affect him, but maybe it did. Like, it just raises all these potential red flags and concerns for a dude who was talked about as like a back end of round 1, or maybe even earlier for some people. Now, for me, I feel like he's a back end of round 2 kind of guy, just based on that roller skill set. Anybody else that you think hurt themselves the most here?
Nope. I think that's really it. And even with those guys, we're splitting hairs a little bit.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. All right. Question number 3. Which wide receiver played themselves into day 1 consideration? It could be somebody who was a fringe guy that you think is firmly entrenched in round 1, somebody who came out of nowhere and has kind of propelled themselves or jumped some tiers. Which wide receiver or wide receivers do you think played themselves into that day 1 consideration?
Ladd McConkey, baby.
Nice.
I mean, I said it last year about Jordan Addison, and I'm gonna say it about Ladd McConkey this year. He is a professional get opener. It does not matter where you put him or what kind of route you put him on. He is going to get open. He just knows how to create space. He has great stop-start acceleration, and that's kind of validated by that 40-yard and the 10-yard split and the short shuttle times, where you see that change of direction. You see that ability not just to have the long speed, but the ability to go from 0 to 60 in a short amount of time. That's going to help him, especially as a guy who's going to live in the slot. And you just think about, okay, you can think about teams that need a guy who can create that instant separation to help get you some easy offense. And you think, okay, this is the Ladd McConkey range. Like, I think he has played himself into kind of that back half of the first round territory. I think he was early day 2 for me. Like, he was like, again, pick 33 was where it started for McConkey, because the Panthers just need somebody out there. But now he's firmly put himself into, okay, I can see him being in the late first round. You know, if a team who already has a guy on the outside and can create some separation there in the in-between game, it would be incredibly funny considering what he only drafts in the first round. But Ladd McConkey as a Philadelphia Eagle makes a lot of sense. Just as Georgia Bulldog wide receiver, Howie Roseman seems to only draft Georgia Bulldogs and receivers and offensive and defensive linemen in the first round. It will be such a Howie Roseman thing to say, okay, we might have a little bit of a need at guard or tackle. Let's go draft a Georgia receiver and see what happens. I mean, it worked for drafting the Bama receiver, but I think he has played himself into easy first round territory to an extent. I believe not necessarily day 1, but early day 2 is Xavier Worthy for me. I mean, when you run a 4-2-1, that's going to help you out a lot. I mean, I was really kind of taken back for Worthy because it's just really hard to win at that size.
Yes.
It's really, really hard to win in the NFL at 165 pounds. Unless you're the fastest person on earth.
There's nobody can touch you.
Maybe you might, but I just worried a little bit about how teams are going to address the frame in the NFL. Yes, he is very, very fast, but you kind of worry because, for every really fast receiver who's really slight, you might also get a Tutu Atwell, who was drafted very high by the Rams, but has turned out to be a specialist who can barely get playing time, So I kind of worried a little bit, but seeing the 4-2-1 and the explosiveness and then pairing that with, you see it on tape, I think he has played himself into what I believe for scouts is the early day 2 area, because you can't teach 4-2-1.
No. And I'll start with Worthy. So again, he's my wide receiver 4. And part of the reason I'm probably not as bullish on him if Tank Dell, Jordan Addison, and Josh Downs didn't work out as they did as rookies. Addison was my one. I think he was for a lot of people, but smaller frame dude, especially for like a potential wide receiver 1 in a class. Like, you don't see somebody in like the 170s as the traditional like wide receiver 1. And then Tank Dell, the tape was there. Like, he balled out at the Senior Bowl. And on the tape, he's a route running technician in addition to the speed. Like, and he has all these red zone touchdowns, or he has all these touchdowns, not because he's pulling out like 60-yard bombs, but because he's routing dudes up in the low red zone and he's just operating with deception and feet. But again, you're looking at him and you're like, yeah, but you're 5'8", 165. Like that's an outlier. Like an outlier looks at Tank Dell as like, you're an outlier. Like that's how far off the scale and off the spectrum he was. And so if Dell didn't perform how he did and Addison didn't perform how he did, again, Josh Downs is more of a slot guy or is a slot guy, but he still performed well. I'm probably not as bullish on Worthy as I am. Granted, that still makes Worthy an outlier. Like even if he is playing at 170 or like at 175, you're still small. Like that means you're 6'1", 175. You are still a smaller frame wide receiver. And with that also comes some limitations in his game. Like you're probably looking at best like a career ceiling of like a slot and a Z. Like you got to be a movement guy. I don't know how much of an X you're going to be, but he does have enough in his release package that cool, you want to cover him one-on-one. If you don't get that hand on him with that jam and he gets that swipe, he's blazing by you. And even dudes that are fast, he's going to make look not fast. Oh, damn, what's that? What's that from? He's so fast, he makes dudes that are fast look not fast.
Oh, my gosh. I don't remember the movie.
I thought it was Ricky Bobby, but I don't think it's not. Oh, I need someone in the chat. Hurry up, look this up. It's going to drive me nuts. Like, I almost can't do the episode until I know what that's from. He makes fast dudes look not fast. Anyway, like, that gives me a little more confidence. But again, the frame is still there. He's a slender dude, but he obviously helped himself, like, tremendously. And I think he played himself into strong day one. He and Brian Thomas, I think, are the two. And I'm going to throw A.D. Mitchell in there as well. I think any one of those three could really be that fourth wide receiver off the board just because of how they performed at the combine and what that tape looks like. And those are, longest yard. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Chris. Appreciate the live chat more than ever. Always appreciate the live chat. Thank you very much. Oh, it's driving me nuts. I really wasn't going to be able to, like, I was talking, but in my head, I was like, what's it from? What's it from? What's it from? Yeah, like, so I think Worthy, I don't know how high he goes, but I think his performance, Thomas and Mitchell, I think are right there. Again, based on what the tape shows, their measurables, the traits, and this combine performance, I think you're looking at a lot of teams kind of salivating in a variety of ways, potentially making them that wide receiver 4. I like your lad option as well. I know I talked about him earlier and you talked about him again here, so I don't want to drill again too home on that. But yeah, I think like if he went in the back end of round 1 earlier, I might have been like, pre-combine, I would have been like, you know what? He's a great route runner. I'm cool with it. But that is a little early. Now I'm like, okay, I have no problem with it, especially watching him, like, again, win on the line against press, be able to win at multiple points in the stem. He can run any route that you want. And he did a thing, and maybe, and I always say this because I don't watch all the tape in the world, but I watch a lot. I've never seen someone use a rocker step in their stem as they're running a go route. And he did that on a rep against Tennessee to freeze his man and blew by him. And I was like, oh, that's a really creative way to run a 9 route. Just he can win in so many ways. I think he threw himself into that conversation big time as well. And it's hard to see those metrics and then see the tape and not think like, man, this guy can be something, especially with, Troy Franklin potentially falling a little bit, potentially seeing what teams think of Keon Coleman. Like, yeah, he had a horrible 40, but he also ran the fastest out of everybody during drills, especially in the gauntlet. So, like, he's slow, but he's fast. He's big, but he's not a good route runner. He's awesome at the catch point and has great hands. He can also return punts. Like, does that throw him into a little bit? I think there's some murkiness for guys in that second and third tier. And the performances of Mitchell, Thomas, Worthy, and McConkey combined with the tape, I think really threw themselves into strong day one consideration. Like, if to the point now, if all 4 of those dudes went in round 1, I wouldn't be surprised at this point now.
Yeah, I think your Keon Coleman point is something we're going to get to next because that is the one guy that I had in mind. But you could see a guy like Ladd McConkey coming up or rising up the draft boards. You can see Xavier Worthy, especially. Again, you as much as people try, you cannot teach 4.2 speed. Like, not 4.3, like 4.2.
Almost 4.1. He ran a 4.21. That's tenths of a second away from being a 4.19. He almost ran a sub 4.2. That's nuts.
Like, and it didn't look like he was even like,
no,
it didn't look like it was like pull off speed. Like it was the last like 20 to 10 yards where he actually made it up. No, he was out of the gate. Like he ran a 4.25 the first time and was like, nah, I can go faster.
Good enough.
Like what even is that? After most guys run a 4.25 and shut it down. He's like, no, I can do faster.
I can be that.
And ran a 4.21. Like you can't teach that. And I think a lot of teams are going to take that speed and be like, oh, he might not be the biggest. He might be a little bit limited, but he's fast. Like, and he's fast. Like he is the SpongeBob. You want to go see me run to that rock? You want to go see me do it again? Like you can do something with that.
Absolutely. And then you see the route running and how he wins. And I don't think, his toughness after the catch is necessarily the smartest thing to do in the NFL, but he's bouncing off like safeties that are coming barreling down in the alley against him. There's the clip of him running through a dude against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game. He puts his shoulder down and goes through his chest. Now, again, I don't think that's going to play with that much regularity in the NFL, but there's so many aspects to his game. And then at the end of the day, even if they weren't like, okay, like, is he the fastest guy in the NFL right now? Like, is that what we're talking about right now? Like that. And some teams are going to have that conversation, and that's a fun thing to have. Anybody else before we move on to our next one?
No, I just started thinking about the receiver drills and the quarterback's throwing. They were in two different groups, but I just want once to see Joe Milton throw a go ball to Xavier Worthy. And I just want to see how far they can actually I want to see how far that ball goes, because Joe Milton, we're talking receivers, but dude, like I don't know what he is in the NFL, but he is a dude perfect thrower. Like that's a guy where, look, I don't know, man, but he waited after he snapped the ball and then went to his drop and threw it 80 yards.
He was letting dudes, like, he was snapping it and just like, okay, and guys were already like 15 to like 25 yards downfield.
Flat-footed, throwing it 75, 80 yards.
With ease. Like, he didn't look like he was straining. He was just flicking it, and
it was the funniest thing seeing fast receivers go, oh shit, I actually got to run for this ball. Like, I actually got to get on the horse.
Doing that nice little coast and then being like, oh, and having to kick it into gear. Yeah, man. And then I felt so bad for Bo Nix right after him, just like, poor Bo Nix, man. Like, you just don't have that arm. It's just not fair. Like, they should have made Milton go last. Like, to make anybody go after Milton is so mean, but especially Bo Nix, who doesn't have that arm. I felt so bad for him.
That's like putting Adam Dunn lead off in the batting lineup. You don't put Adam Dunn lead off. You let him go clean up.
Yeah,
he's either gonna hit a grand slam or he's striking out. And that I think is Joe Milton's best comparison as a prospect. Nice. He is Adam Dunn.
I like that a lot. Right? Yeah, you don't want to go after Adam Dunn in like batting practice for the fans, because he's out there just launching moon balls, and then here you come, you're like, well, yeah, I'm on like 295 hitter, and it's like, great, nobody wants to see your line drive hits now. Adam Dunn just launched moonshots 470 feet into the state. What are you going to do? And you're just like, well, I'm Bo Nix. I just hit singles and doubles. They're like, next. Hey, nobody cares. Everybody hates you.
That's all right. Everybody's got to be, everybody can be Chase Utley.
That's true.
Just get on base. But, Joe Milton is going to be that 2019 Chris Davis, where he's going to hit like 75 homers and then strike out every other time.
I forgot about Chris Davis. And I'm also thinking of who was on those Cleveland teams? It was like the Grady Sizemore, Travis Hafner. Lefty power dude, always had a big thing of chaw in his mouth, just like lefty power bat, who was either going to yoke it 450 feet out or was going to strike out miserably. But like, he just armored up, like big pad stuff on his wrist, like crouched down, looked real mean, spitting chaw out of his mouth. And you knew like, oh, if he connects on a fastball, it's gone. It's like, but if you throw him anything else, he's probably missing it.
Yeah, if you let Joe Milton just stand in the pocket, don't let him have any pressure. You tell him to throw one thing, it looks great, but everything else outside of that, I don't know.
So great. Not so good with the quarterback stuff. My next question for you. This is my favorite one. The 2024 Puka Nacua, aka which wide receiver will present the best value and exceed their draft slot? Who is that for you?
This is Keon Coleman. And I
Okay.
think the reason I say that is because in my mock draft today, which precursor I do as what I think is going to happen and not what I would do.
That's a
Because
very important classification because you can do one and everyone's like, they would never take him here. You suck. And it's like, I'm doing what I think they would do. Please don't yell at me.
Yeah, what I would do is Keon Coleman is a first round receiver. What I think is going to happen is teams are going to see the 40 and go, I don't know, especially with a guy who's kind of vibey as a route runner.
Yes.
But we talked about the gauntlet. 20 miles an hour, exceeding 20 miles an hour in the gauntlet and running straight down the line. What else do you need to see?
And good hands on top of that, too. He's just plucking everything super slow.
Plucking the ball out the air. He is a game speed over play speed. That is a GPS guy because as someone who was a Florida State fan watching every game, I can tell Keon Coleman is fast. His 40 time is fast enough. It does not matter because he will jump over your DB. He will go through your DB or go around your DB. He just knows how to create after the catch. I mean, he was a punt returner and a really good punt returner at that. So I think he is going to be a guy who was hurt by the 40, but he's your typical, once their GPS numbers come out, and it's like, oh, this guy is moving.
Yeah.
Like we're going to look back and be like, oh, how did this guy fall to the second round? Or how did we let this guy fall into day 2? Because that's what you want in an outside receiver, the size, the hands. And even with the 40, he ran a 1.54 10-yard split, which was the same as Jacob Cowling and Tez Walker. He's explosive in those 10 yards. And if you're watching on film, that's what Keon Coleman is. He wins in bursts of acceleration and up. He is he's like a right angle. He's going to go out and he's going to go up. He's got the burst and he's going to go up with the vertical. He can create in those little short yard areas, but he wins off of bursts of explosiveness.
He's somebody who, and I had A.D. Mitchell a little bit into this conversation as well, but someone who I think is just like an absolute enigma is Keon Coleman. Like you watch, there's so many reps on tape that end so pretty where like his route stem is ugly. Like I have no idea what he's running. And then he mosses somebody, or he makes like a sick one-handed catch in the end zone and brings it in, or he separates with physicality, makes the catch, and then takes off for 30 yards downfield. Just like the juxtaposition in terms of like how his reps start versus how they finish. And it's just like, something's got to be there. And then, yeah, you see the miles per hour that he was cooking with at the combine. You put it together with that frame of being a 6'3", like 210-pound plus type of dude. Like he looks the part. He's got the athleticism. He's got the size. He's got burst at times. He's got the hands. He can play above the rim. Like he's somebody that if he clicks, he's going to be that guy that everybody's like, man, I can't believe he went 45th or he went 57th or wherever he goes, because you're going to look back on it and be like, I can't believe we didn't trust the size and the athleticism and the traits that we saw on the miles per hour, like testing. Like I understand teams and people being wary, but there are some aspects, yeah, where you just see him on tape where you're just like, oh my God, like look at that guy. Or he has a touchdown too against LSU, not the long one with the yards after catch, the second one where he makes it in like the kind of the back corner of the end zone.
Yeah.
And he plucks it. And the DB is right there and punches through his hands and then tries to rip the ball out as Coleman is falling down. And it doesn't matter. The hand strength that you have to have is nuts.
It's the basketball player coming out, It
He's
reminded me a lot
off the glass.
You remember the Julio touchdown catch against Malcolm Butler where he has the ball and then he just rips it away from Malcolm Butler like a child? Yep. That is the same type of thing. You see the basketball player ability going up above the rim to catch the ball. And he has, again, incredibly strong hands. Like you can see a guy like that and go, oh, I can work with this. And then we add on top the gauntlet drill. We add on top the going over 20 miles an hour, which is the fastest of the group that he ran with. Like that's
nuts.
I get why we're making a lot of the 40, but even with the 40-yard dash, I believe his relative athletic score was, I think it was a 9.32, if I remember correctly. I'm checking it now. It's 9.23, which is 238th out of 3,000 receivers since 1987. It seems like a good athlete to me.
So still pretty good. Yeah. It's just like, yeah,
pretty good.
Not a great 40 and 20 and 10, but bro, yeah, like he's one who, again, like will throw people for a loop because the people who were out on him, if he doesn't work out, are going to be like, see, I told you he sucked. But the people that were out on him, and if he balls out, they're going to be like, I can't believe we didn't trust like all the traits that we saw. Yeah, he's a really interesting one for me. And I could see I had him in this conversation for me for this answer because, again, if he clicks based on where I think he's going to get taken, you're kicking yourself for not taking him. I went a little further down the board. It's a guy who I've really liked since before the Senior Bowl, and I liked him more at it. I'm going to go with Javon Baker, wide receiver from UCF. Oh, yeah. There's just so many aspects of his game on tape. I think he arguably has the best release package in this class. Like he's got multiple moves off the line at, with suddenness, explosion, power. Like he's got hand swipes and hand technique, like the variety of things he can do. And again, at that size, being 6'1", 202 pounds, he's got kind of that, you'd like to potentially be like a little bigger, but I think he can operate as a true X in this NFL with his release package and what he does from a physicality standpoint. I think you do have to improve his stem work a little bit. I think he needs more like deception and pacing. But you just see the athleticism and the physicality regularly. He knows how to work leverage. He can play above the rim a little bit. He had a really nice play at the Senior Bowl in red zone work in the low red zone where he mossed a dude. Like you see the athleticism and the physicality work regularly. And even with needing some stem work and things, he's got aspects where he knows how to completely turn around a safety or turn around a wide receiver or turn around a corner, whether it's an outside corner or a slot. And he, because of his size and physicality, he is a good blocker. He can function in the slot a little bit, but he can really live on that outside. I thought he would be more of a day 3, like round 4 type of dude with how well he did the Senior Bowl. And then again, his testing wasn't bad at all. I see him kind of creeping up into more of that day 2 range and generating some buzz. He's really in that next tier of guys where it's like him and Jalen Polk and like Jamari Thrash and Jalen McMillan. And it's all this like who values what teams are on the board, what's the scheme fit and skill set that will really determine where they go. But Javon Baker is someone who I see just on that backside one-on-one. You got to put a safety over the top because he can moss your guy. He can beat him off the line. He can beat him with physicality. He's tremendous separating at the catch point with having his hand on you and knowing how to extend just enough to give himself space without
the legal OPI.
Yes. And bro, like he's so adept at it. You see him do it so much to the point that it's either coached or it's drilled into him because it's not just by accident. He does it so much on back shoulder throws and even stuff downfield where he's going over the shoulder. There's a lot to work with. He's got a lot. He's really an amalgamation of a lot of different types of wide receivers as far as comps, even though I'm not a big like comps guy. And I just think there's so many options to tap into while he's still raw. And so I think he could be somebody who, again, looks like back end of day 2 kind of, or early day 3, who I think really could surprise some people.
So I'm also not a big comp guy, but I am when it comes to measurables and kind of style of play. He's very similar physically and stylistically to Michael Gallup coming out of Colorado State. They're both around 6 feet, 6'1", 205 pounds. I believe they ran the same 40-yard dash. And what really surprises me about Javon Baker is he plays a lot bigger than he actually is.
Yeah, I would have thought he was like 6'3", 215 with the way he plays. And I'm like, like 6'1", 200. Interesting.
Like, I'm not saying that is the player that he's going to become, but it's very similar to Jamar Chase coming out of LSU, who played so much bigger and stronger than the 6 feet, 205 pound frame that he was in.
Yeah.
But you just look at the ability to go up over defenders. You look at the ability after the catch. He's such a strong player after the catch. I think he's going to be I initially thought kind of late day 2, early day 3, but you could see him being like a really good number 2.
Yes.
Honestly, you can see him being the best of Michael Gallup.
Yes, absolutely. And if he clicks in the right way with his athleticism, I could see him being like a low-end 1, depending on the team that you put on. But I really think he could be like such a high-end wide receiver too with his skill set, especially if you're like, again, not to tie in the Bills conversation necessarily directly, but like where your number 1 is a Stephon Diggs and you want your wide receiver 2 to be more of that prototypical X who's on that backside one-on-one by himself, like, man, like that pairing, you're looking at the example I continue to give is you got trips to the right side or whatever, and it's Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, and Stephon Diggs, and then Javon Baker's on the backside one-on-one. It's like, okay, like, what does that corner look like? Because Javon's probably going to beat him off the line if he presses him. If not, he can eat up that cushion and pop out, and he can beat him in a variety of ways. Like, that's where he starts to become, like, really intriguing. Yeah, but again, and this, honestly, this answer could go like 100 different ways because there's so many receivers that are going to go in like round 2 and round 3 or even round 4 that everyone's going to be like, oh, I can't believe they didn't go earlier because this class is so deep and so good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another guy that kind of falls in that category who didn't test at the combine, and I was really disappointed, is Malachi Corley. I think Malachi
I haven't
Corley
seen enough tape on him. Like, I can't, I've gotten some smatterings, but it's not enough for me to complete an eval. And then when he didn't perform at the combine, I was so pissed.
We talked a little bit about Troy Franklin being kind of the Rick Mahorn of an NFL offense. That's Malachi Corley. Like, he does one thing, he does a few things really well. But one of those things is he is a running back after the catch. You think of Deebo Samuel. This is the Deebo Samuel.
Everybody's so quick now to be like, this guy's the next Deebo, this guy's the next Deebo, but it actually really fits for Malachi Corley.
It actually makes sense. I believe his his yards per route run has never gone over like 2 yards at Western Kentucky. Like, they very much knew, like, okay, this guy is great with the ball in his hands, but not exactly a refined route runner, especially at the top of his routes. Won't matter. Just let him run bubble screens and jet sweeps, and nobody can tackle him. He's just such an interesting player because of that true lack of any downfield targets. But if you're looking at a team who runs like a Shanahan offense or a Sean McVay offense that needs kind of that move guy, I brought them up earlier, but Atlanta would be really good for Malachi Corley because he can kind of be the easy offense part of that team where he'll take your bubble screen and get you 6 yards. And instead of that being, oh, we're at 2nd and 7, we're at 2nd and 4. And that immediately makes offense a lot easier. You're taking this check down and you're getting 6-7 yards, which makes life a whole lot easier. Malachi Corley can do that while also not really having to be asked to do a lot of real receiver stuff.
No, like and it's so simplistic for a quarterback because you're just spitting it out real fast around the line of scrimmage, and then he's making you look good by taking like a average depth of target throw of 0 and turning it into 9 yards, or like you gave him the ball at 2 yards and he turned it into 15. And it's also funny. I checked this during the Senior Bowl and I double checked it now to make sure. His bio on Twitter, he calls himself the Yak King and has a crown, which I just think he just knows his brand, man.
Look, it's one thing to have a gimmick. It's another to live the gimmick. Malachi Corley lives his gimmick. He is about that action, and he knows what he brings.
It's just good to see, like, know thyself, know who you are, and he's already branded himself. And like, I'm surprised he doesn't have an apparel line already and like hoodies and hats and stuff out for it just to like go on brand. Yeah, man, like that's a good call. That's a good call. All right, now start to get to our final couple of questions and segments here. So I have this labeled 2024 post-combine rankings, but we've had a lot of tiering conversation here. We're going to focus on the next 5 wide receivers after the big 3. I also realize I've been shorthanding Marvin Harrison Jr., and I don't know why, but in my notes to you multiple times, I called him MVH instead of MHJ, and I just noticed that now. I have like no idea why, and it just pissed me off so much. I don't know if that's
Harrison.
Right. That actually works. I like, you know what? I meant to do that. Thank you so much. Collaboration, teamwork. Yeah. So after, however anybody has them, I don't care. But the consensus, and I think rightfully so, top 3, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, however you have them, who's 1, who's 2, who's 3. That is the top 3 for everyone. I think it should be. I think there can be some debate about who is 2 and who is 3, and actually potentially for some now, because, you know, some people have Neighbors as 1, but which I think is getting into a little bit of the, not that Neighbors is a far better prospect than I'm about to make the comparison with, but I feel like the Neighbors over Harrison conversation is starting to get a little bit into the Tyree Wilson over Will Anderson conversation from last year. But Neighbors is just super legit. I didn't buy into Tyree Wilson, and I thought we were doing the whole like Anderson dominated and then came back and everybody was like, Oh, because it's like it's hard to reach that expectation and that bar that you set. I think Harrison's getting that a little bit, but I digress. So aside from Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Romo Dunze, give me your next 5 wide receivers in order in this draft class.
I had my big board done pre-combine, but I think the rankings are going to change a little bit after. Okay. So like I said, we've kind of tiered it out. First tier is Marvin Harrison Jr., Roma Dunze, Malik Neighbors. Yep. I think you get those 3 cut dry, you're there.
Yes.
The next group is kind of where I flipped it a little bit. So initially I had Brian Thomas Jr., Keon Coleman, A.D. Mitchell. Now I think I'm going Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman.
Okay.
And I think for me in the big board, the gap between the 3 were so small where a 40 time for A.D. Mitchell, I can go, okay, that I can do this now. Like I'm willing to go there now. Like the gap between them was so small where you're like, okay, now I can kind of get on board with this. Then the next 2 receivers I had were Jalen Polk and Ladd McConkey.
Nice.
I'm a big Jalen Polk guy. I love all the Washington receivers. Polk had a rough first half of the season when it came to drops. But again, he is so explosive as a prospect when you watch him on tape. The 4.52 kind of doesn't tell the whole story.
Absolutely.
But he was there like outside of Adunze. He was the go down the field, and he was also the quick screen guy. So he was able to do those things and be kind of a specialist in an offense, but I think he has a lot of room to grow as a player. I think Jalen McMillan is the same way, where they have so much room to grow as athletes and players. So I love Jalen Polk's ability. And like we said, Ladd McConkey, professional get opener. I would be much more willing to put Ladd McConkey as right behind Coleman as that receiver. I guess he'd be
5, 6.
He'd be 7.
Yep.
I can put him in that anywhere in that wide receiver, like 5 to 7 or 5 to 8 range or 4 to 8 range. Honestly, with Ladd McConkey, I'm cool with wherever you have him. Like, all right, that I can see that because he's answered every question that has been asked of him in this process. Can he get off press? He did it at the Senior Bowl. Is he fast enough? He just ran a 4.39. At this point, it's like, what else can he do? What else we got to do? I think the injury will probably play a little bit of a role. He was a little dinged up this past season at Georgia. But look, if you want an exclusively, like if you want a slot receiver who can really move and can really provide you with easy offense at any level of the field, it's Ladd McConkey. So I think that's where I'm at right now. It's probably going to change a little bit as I do more in-depth scouting post-combine. I think I'm going to go back and watch some more Javon Baker because I got early scouting on him, of course, because I live in Orlando, watch UCF games. Girlfriend's a UCF fan, so nice. I had to watch a lot of UCF games. I remember the Oklahoma game where
he blows the kiss.
He blows the kiss to the fans. I'm like, all right, I'm in on this guy.
I love this guy. Give me his jersey.
This guy is a top-tier shit talker, buffoonery, tomfoolery, shithousery. I want this guy on my team. Everybody needs a guy who's going to do that, but only one guy.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back and watch some more of him. I just got finished watching some more Jalen Coker, and like I said, I think he can be a good day 3 option. But right now, the next 5 are Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman, and then I think I'm going to go Ladd McConkey, Jalen Polk.
Nice. This one was really hard for me, like with kind of really the wide receiver 8, so like the last of the 5 ranking after the top 3. So I mentioned earlier, I've got Worthy as 4, I've got Brian Thomas Jr. as 5, and then I've got A.D. Mitchell as 6, Ladd McConkey as 7. But I kind of want to put, and it's so funny because they're such different players. I kind of want to put Mitchell and Ladd, like I have Mitchell 6, Ladd is 7, but they're here. Like they're on the
6A, 6B.
That's exactly right. They're on the same line. So, and it's so funny because they're so vastly different with their profiles and how they play the game. And I think that's a legit separation for me. Like to your point with the tiers, like I think you've got the big 3. And then for me, Worthy, Brian Thomas, Mitchell, and McConkey now, I think have separated themselves a little bit as kind of like that next tier. But then the last spot in that tier or the first spot in the tier after, this one is where I really struggled. Like, you could put Jalen Polk there. You could put Javon Baker there. Like, you could put Keon Coleman there. Like, the names, I understand if somebody wants to put Xavier Legette down there. I know we haven't talked about him a bunch. Like, Roman Wilson does a lot of like really cool things. I'm cool if someone wants to put him there. Like, I really struggled with who is at this wide receiver 8 spot for me. I'm going to leave Keon Coleman there, but it's kind of like Coleman. I wanted to just not even just like to put it in for the sake. I wanted to put some like bigger bodied dude. So like, give me Coleman, give me Javon Baker, like give me somebody that has more of that true like profile to put in. But I really could have thrown in like 10 different dudes. And I love both of the Jalens, even though their names are spelled different. But Polk and McMillan, especially too, I went back to 2022 because McMillan was really the number 2 in Washington in 2022. Started out that way this year, got hurt. That helped Polk emerge a little bit. Then McMillan came back and was more of like the slot and underneath guy. But he's got a rep in 2022. And I posted it last week. He's running a post against Christian Gonzalez, who was my corner 1 last year coming out of Oregon. And Gonzalez is right on top of him, like, because Gonzalez is awesome. And the ball's thrown like 40, 50 yards downfield from Penix. And Gonzalez kind of goes over the top of him to try and moss him and pick it. But Polk goes up with him, turns in midair, and rips the ball away from Christian Gonzalez as they go to the ground. And that to me was like, whoa, like that's a legit corner, and you just beat the hell out of him on this rep. And there's obviously other like good things he does. He has a really good red zone rep this year where they bracket him and he shakes the linebacker and then shakes the safety, splits them both, and gets open in the back of the end zone. I really like McMillan. Even this comment here from Walter saying, like, I really like Jermaine Burton. I really do like Jermaine Burton. Like, bro, he's just got so many. The things that worry me a little bit, like the after the game stuff against Tennessee where he like hit that fan or did whatever, like, and he's a dog to the point where I'm like, I don't know if he can ever be reeled in. Like, he is, and I love it, but also worries me. So in the game against Texas A&M, it's like the first or second drive. It's like 2nd and 7, and he runs like a 6-yard hitch, and the corner breaks it up, punches it out of his hands. Burton drops it and says something to Burton. For the entire rest of that game, every time Burton makes any kind of catch, he is barking at that corner every single rep, no matter what, letting him know. You could tell, like, he dropped that one and was like, oh, word? Okay, I got you. And he cooks him the rep. Like, he's running stunner goes. He's running slants and breaking tackles from linebackers and safeties. He's got a route against that same corner. He's operating as the number 2 in a stack. And it's just like a deep out. But the corner grabs him, like completely grabs his arm because Burton beats him on the release and gets by him. And Burton, rather than just like trying to draw the flag, plays through it, literally shakes him off his body as he snaps out on the out, completely throws the corner, and then is wide open. And then, of course, gets up and talks and immediately points and runs his mouth. Like, he plays with juice. He tested well. I think he has good route running precision. He's toughness. Like, he's got good size. He's one that like is a dark horse candidate for me in general in this draft, but I also would throw in there. I'm only 2 games in, so I want to watch at least 2 more. I'll probably watch 3 or 4 more just because of how he was used. Actually, in general, like him and Isaiah Bond, I feel like weren't talked about enough as wide receivers at Alabama this year. I think
Isaiah Bond was phenomenal.
Bro, so good. And he's going to ball out at Texas. Like, just a cool spot for him. I think they both got hindered a little bit by Milroe trying to find his game as a passer. But yeah, Burton just plays with this juice and this tenacity that I just find intoxicating.
Burton runs such good post corners.
Good call.
And like,
he's got a good rocker step too. He knows how to use that rocker, and
he is really good at the late separation point of route running, where if you have him running routes downfield like a post corner or a corner post, he can create that separation. I like the points you had about the Texas A&M game because every team needs a Jermaine Burton. They only need one Jermaine Burton.
You can't take Burton and Javon Baker. That's too much on the same team.
That's too much. That is too many problems. That is too many chaos bringers. But everybody needs a chaos bringer. You know, you were talking about how many good, like really good receivers are going to be in this class. And we talked about it at the front. Ricky Pearsall is a guy who I think is going to step in immediately and be a really good number 3.
He could be that Puka Nacua like winner where he gets taken. You're like, man, how did everybody wait till round 3 to take Ricky Pearsall or whatever?
Yeah, he also has the greatest catch I think I've ever seen.
All that
against
one
Charlotte, where he just basically grabs it out the air like go gadget, and like
nice.
I don't understand how he did it, but he just palmed the ball. And again, it wasn't like it was a sideline catch. This was over the middle of the field.
In like the seam as he's about to get hit, falling, just nuts.
Insane confidence to go up with one hand and make that catch. You know, we talked about him. Again, Corley is a guy who I think is going to fill a really good need for a team. Leggett can be, again, threes and dunks. That's what you want Leggett doing right now. You want him to run the threes and dunks offense. 2016 Rockets. 7 seconds or less, baby. You're either going to run that go route or you're going to run this screen, and we're going to see what we can do after. He's had a really weird, really odd kind of post-season process.
Yeah.
He and also Tez Walker had a really weird. He had a really weird season, but the pre-draft process hasn't been kind to him.
Horrible Senior Bowl.
Senior Bowl was rough.
And I wanted him to do good, and like he just kept dropping like everything, and you could tell that I thought he was, and I'm not saying this jokingly, like I thought he was going to have like a breakdown because he was so frustrated at himself.
I think he got
bro, and he kept getting open. Like he kept winning in all these ways, and he kept dropping like everything to the point that I remember like the coaching staff were trying to be like, bro, like calm down. Like it's okay. You could tell how frustrated he was with himself.
Yeah. You could tell he was getting inside of his own head. It was like having the yips, you know, like it's really hard to get out of that, but you're going to count on that speed. You can count on that guy being the deep vertical threat. I think he is the MVS of this class. You know, there's a lot of guys who are kind of MVS coded in this class. I with Troy Franklin and Tez Walker. I think Tez Walker is really the he's MVS heavy, and Troy Franklin is diet MVS in a good way. I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean that in a kind way. It's like Bud Light, Bud heavy, you know. Tez Walker is MVS heavy, but there's so many guys who can fill even the specialist roles in this class, who can be really, really good specialists. Jacob Cowing is going to be a really, really good specialist. He's, again, not big, not at all. He is a tiny receiver, but he can win in the slot. That is a guy who benefits a lot from Tank Dell being very good in the NFL immediately because he's around that same size, but he is going to be a really good specialist for a team. And his teammate, Teteroa McMillan at Arizona, next year is a dude. He is a dude at receiver. But there's so many different types of receivers in this class. So many different flavors that if you want, you can pick from anybody.
Yep. Cowing isn't a good name. Like, he's got some really great tape. And then, like, I saw him come into the Senior Bowl, and he didn't perform how I wanted him to or would have liked to see him perform at. But then he had a good combine, like tested well, running sub 4.4. And again, like you said, like he'll benefit from that kind of like frame and like smaller guys succeeding. But he's someone I feel like has kind of fallen off in the conversation a little bit after being kind of like a draft darling early on. It really is. Again, this is another conversation where like dart throw, you're probably going to land on a good wide receiver. Like it's really pretty nuts. All right.
I wonder how many guys, I wonder how many teams are going to just trade up in the day two. I think overall that's going to be a major point for this draft because of how many guys ended up going back to college due to NIL, transfer portal. I wonder how many teams are just going to say, screw it, we'll just punt on this draft and trade up and either trade out into next year's draft or see teams go, we don't want to let our picks go to waste here. Let's just trade up into day two or in early day three and see if we can get a guy. Or maybe we see teams who are going to draft, you know, in previous years, probably priority UDFAs, just saying like, hey, look, there's not a lot of depth at the back end in some points of this class. But with this receiver class, I wonder how many teams are just going to trade up into day two and try and grab as many of them as possible.
I'm wondering that too, like how many like teams really go for the kind of quality over quantity aspect with this draft class from a pick perspective, especially with how thorough like that wide receiver class is and being able to have cost control on multiple receivers going forward for like any team, like, man, like, especially for a team like Kansas City potentially, like who has kind of hit a lot of things on defense. Granted, we'll see what happens with Snead and Jones going forward this offseason, but like they need a lot of wide receiver help. Like maybe they double dip 2 out of the first 3 rounds and sacrifice some picks and come out with like, instead of having like, again, that quantity piece, like they go for more of the quality aspect for like multiple top tier type of dudes. Like, and that's just one example. Like yeah, this class is just there's so much usage potential, like for whatever you're looking for. Like, do you want a movement guy? We got it. Do you want a slot guy? We got it. Do you want an X guy? We got it. Do you want somebody who's a little bit of all that? We got it. Do you want yards after catch? We got it. You want route runners? We got, like, it's everything. So like, what do you need? Obviously that's going to determine how the board goes, but there's really something to like in almost like every guy. Even if you're a team that doesn't need a slot receiver, you can look at a Ricky Pearsall or Ladd McConkey and be like, should we take Ladd McConkey and Ricky Pearsall? Because like, you know what? Yeah, we can play him a little on the outside. Or, Ricky's more like the slot, but we could also do this because he ran a 4.4. It's just all these aspects. Like, it's so fun with how deep this class is. And yeah, it's just absolutely wild, like how well they've done. I like this comment from William saying, eat at the 2023 wide receiver buffet. Yeah, that's exactly right.
If you think you want one, go get 2. If you think you want 2, go get 3. I mean, that's might as well. Like, look, if you draft a guy like Xavier Legette, who might be an outside receiver, and only does like yak and deep stuff right now, go draft Ricky Pearsall too. They complement each other. If you kind of fusion dance Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette, you get the perfect wide receiver. So you just have both of them at the same time. You can have them on the same field, and you can really get to cooking. But you just want to give yourself as many throws at the dartboard, like you said, as at this receiver class. Just try it. Just see what happens, because you might not get this shot again.
No, you might go back up and there's no more butterfly shrimp. So just get as much butterfly shrimp as you can before you go back and sit down at the table.
Exactly.
That's what you got to do. Every wide receiver is butterfly shrimp. That's what it is. A little more large scale perspective here, as we've talked about evaluating prospects and pieces. When you watch for college receivers and trying to, see who's going to translate and transition to that next level at the NFL, is there one or two or a handful of things you look for? Is there something that you place above everything else? Is it something technical? Is it something traits versus skill set? What do you look for or watch for when evaluating wide receivers?
So what I really like to do first is kind of dig into the numbers of where they lined up, their alignment, what they were asked to do. When you're comparing guys and ranking guys when it comes to, like, again, an AD Mitchell versus a Ladd McConkey, they might be asked to do 2 different things at the NFL level, because that's what they were asked to do in college. AD Mitchell doesn't have a lot of production after the catch because he was used as the traditional X receiver outside guy. And he even said that at the combine, I don't have a lot of yak because that's not what I was asked to do in the offense. So you're not going to ask him to do that initially at the NFL level, because you want to make that acclimation as easy as possible. Whereas with Ladd McConkey, you don't want to have him running all the outside routes. You want to have a guy who can kind of take those blows for him. But what you want to do is get him a free release where he can really, really work those nickel corners, those safeties. So that's where I first start. I start with trying to figure out where this guy lined up, what they did best, and where the team used him. And then I'm looking at their targets. I'm looking at how you caught the ball, what kind of routes you were asked to run a lot. What were you most successful at? Because we might get a guy who's an X receiver, but all the routes are against off coverage. And he's just like, he might be against off coverage, but he's eating up that off coverage real quickly. So it might see a guy who, he might be pretty fast, and he can be able to create that separation in those 6-yard stop routes that have become all too common in college football and in football in general, just where you're eating up the cushion and then turning right back around. And then next, I like to look at how they do against press, because that's going to obviously be a problem, especially with where I think the NFL is going. You see teams like Kansas City who have physical corners who are going to want to be in your face. You see coordinators like Ryan Nielsen, who wants to play his corners in a very press man style. Again, with defensive coordinators, all of them want to live in cover 1 on 3rd down. Yeah. That's what you want to get to, because we all believe our guy's better than your guy. You can't get away from them. So now you want to see guys who can create against press coverage. But I think it all comes with contextualizing these guys to create a full picture. We were saying a lot about Troy Franklin. Like, the fact that right now he might just be a downfield vertical receiver isn't an indictment of what he can be when we have this conversation, maybe like 4 years, 3 years down the line. It's just, this is what he's going to do now. This is what he's going to do right now. When you think about the NFL and teams want to win the Super Bowl right now. That is the goal. You go in to win the Super Bowl in 2025. And I think that's where you see, okay, this is what this guy can do for us now. Now we see what this guy can become. And that's where you put together the body type, the movement skills. I think age kind of plays a role here a little bit, just because you look at age, you kind of think, hey, maybe this guy has a maxed out frame. Like if you're 23, 24 years old, like you might not be able to grow. You might not be able to put on a little more weight, a little more good weight.
Yes.
It's very rare. Unless
we could all put on bad weight.
Yeah, we can put on bad weight, but it's really rare for a guy that at that age to put on good weight once they get to the NFL. But there's a lot of compounding factors. But I was on a show pre-combine talking about what to really watch. And I brought receivers a lot because you want to look at explosiveness. You want to look at the hips. And that's where I think the broad jumps, the vertical jump, the short shuttles. Then we can look at the 40, and that's really fun. The 40-yard dash is great, but you think about what it takes to win as a receiver and what it takes to win in the NFL in general. The NFL is built on 5 to 7 second explosion. And then you get like 10 seconds to relax a little bit. You're not constantly running. This isn't soccer or basketball where you're constantly having to run full speed. You get a little bit of a break between, but when that ball is snapped, you have to be moving. You have to go from 0 to 60 very quickly. And that's why I think the jumps, the explosion, you want to be able to see that, because that's where receivers are going to make their money. You want to be able to be explosive and create in those 10 to 15-yard areas, because we've had this discussion before. The NFL is cyclical, and where I think the NFL is going now, because of how often teams are playing shell coverage and eliminating everything deep, being able to win after the catch, unless you're Marvin Harrison Jr., who is one of the best outside receivers I have possibly ever seen or ever scouted, it's important to be able to win after the catch. And even if guys really aren't the most creative after the catch, like A.D. Mitchell, maybe they win in other ways. And that's where I think it comes down to with scouting. What you're watching for is what this guy is now and what he can win at right now. That's where the production, where, okay, maybe he won in this way right now, but then you look at the movement skills, the body type, and that's what you're looking at for what he can become.
I love that. I love pretty much everything you said. I mean, I gravitate towards what you say in general, but you nailed it. And it hits so many of the things that I really look for in myself. Like the big thing for me, I start with, and I love how you said it, like what can they do right now? Like that's my starting point for everything. Like, what is your floor? Like, okay, if we draft you right now and you never improve, what do we get out of this pick? Because it's not a guarantee that anybody's going to improve. There's so much nature in the person, but also nurture for the organization that you get, like, which is why the conversation always, and we get it with the Bills all the time. Like, I can't stand the conversation of, well, the Bills passed on Mahomes. The Bills could have had Mahomes. The Bills didn't need to trade for Stephon Diggs. They could have just sat and had Justin Jefferson. There's so many factors that go into making a player who they are. Just dropping them off into another franchise doesn't guarantee the exact same career trajectory, especially for one like Mahomes, who sat and learned genuinely behind Alex Smith, and they got paired up with like Bieniemy and Nagy and Andy Reid over and over and over again. It had Travis Kelce and this support system and Tyreek Hill and the weapons and everything. The Bills didn't have that infrastructure, and so much of who a player becomes is on them, like your drive, your work ethic, what you do to take your game to the next level. But a lot of it too is that franchise piece. Like, are you set up for success? Is the fit right physically and mentally on and off the field? There's so many ways that these things can go sideways. So it's not a guarantee that these players hit their ceilings. If it was, everybody would hit on every single friggin' pick in the draft every single year. It's part of the reason why the draft is a crapshoot, because we don't know how dudes are going to turn out. So I start with, what can they do right now? Like that, going back to earlier, talking about Brian Thomas, right? Like if nothing else, I got a big dude who can play above the rim and who runs really fast. Okay, even if he doesn't hit the ceiling, I think I might be able to work with this a little bit in some kind of way. Probably don't get the value, but I can at least do some things with a really big guy who runs really fast. And so much of that for me is also tied into the route running. I want to see how guys win. Are you winning at the release? Are you winning in your stem? How are you winning in the stem? What type of routes do you win on? Do you win on the break? How do you win on the break? Is it with technique? Is it with power? Is it with physicality? Is it with all of those things? Do you separate at the catch point versus separating the stem versus separating at the release and winning on the release? So all of those things going together, along with the size and frame, and kind of putting a page together for a guy and seeing how do they win and can they continue to win like that in the NFL, which is why route running to me is like the number one that I start with, because good route running translates no matter what. Even if you're slow as hell, if you know how to move, if you know how to sell, if you know how to deceive in your stems and in your breaks and in your routes with eyes, head, body language, all that kind of stuff, you can make a name for yourself. Adam Thielen was probably running like a 4.9 40 this past year in Carolina, and he's separated left and right because he knows how to lie to defenders and manipulate them. He's running deep overs and creating like 10 yards of separation, and he's slow as hell doing it, but he's wide open because he knows how to manipulate it. I always put it back to like a pitcher. You started out earlier in your career, cool. You were throwing 97, 98, and touching 99 with your fastball, cool. When you're 31, 32, 33, that gas is gone, bro. Like, can you pitch? Can you be a Greg Maddux or a Tom Glavine? Can you paint those corners? Can you be a pitcher as opposed to being a thrower? And so I look at those things a lot, like, which is why I usually gravitate towards like the McConkeys and the Pearsalls of the world. These guys who they provide such a high floor. And granted, I think both of them have actually some fun ceilings now with what we've seen. But even if they didn't, I'd be like, well, you know what? Those are dudes you can find a home for right now because of how they win, because how they win is translatable at the next level. That is what I am looking for with everything. It is just that pure piece of how do you win right now in college, and can you win that way in the NFL? And if not, do you have the capacity to change your game or enhance your game to be able to win in that way at the NFL or win in different ways? To your point, like that's when you start to look at the traits and the size and the frame and think like, okay, does this player have the capacity to play in this way or change this or refine this? And if not, then you're looking at more of a floor player. What does it take for them to hit that ceiling? And then what does their floor look like? And for me, that starts with the route running piece and separation aspect. And then you're tying it in with the skill set and the traits to really build and go from there towards touching that ceiling.
And even with route running, what I think has I think not that route running has not mattered, because it really does, but I think it really depends on what you need and what your team needs are. DK Metcalf is not the greatest route runner. No. He's not the best route runner on his team. But when the Seahawks drafted DK Metcalf, they knew that going in. They didn't need a guy who was going to create separation via route running. They had Tyler Lockett for that. They needed a big dude who can run fast. You only got to run 3 routes: hitch, slant, and go. And he's really good at doing that. And I think that also ties into what a team likes to do, what their team needs, or what they ask of receivers. And that's going to be something that's really important when it comes to this class, because there's so many guys who do so many different things.
Yes.
It really just depends on what you look for in your team. What are you looking for when you build out your receiver core?
That's a great, exactly way, like the exact way to put it, because it's that's where that fit comes in. And that's why that nurture aspect is so well. If you bring in player A to do X because you think, hey, we can turn him into this guy who can do X, but really he's made to be Y, let him be Y. Like sometimes it's that round peg in a square hole type of thing, and that fit isn't there. And then people are sitting there going like, oh, how come we never saw him, reach the heights that he was supposed to reach? Well, it's because he was playing out of a spot. And I think that's where that goes into our conversation earlier when we were talking about those traits guys and the coaches who think like, oh, I can coach this guy up. The conversation we were having about Johnny Wilson. Some of that sometimes can work on the other side of the coin in a negative way, where coaches have that hubris about themselves and they think, I know this guy is made to do X, but I can get him to do Y. And then you're sitting there 3 or 4 years later and this guy's 4th or 5th on your depth chart, and he never amounted to what you wanted him to be because you tried to force him into this box that he wasn't necessarily built to live in. And I feel like I know it's a popular said quote, but it was said recently by someone, but the whole idea of like organizations fail the players more than the players fail the organizations when it comes to who they become. And I think, honestly, I do think that's true. I think it's a bit of both, but I would say like it's 60-40 or 55-45 something, because a lot of times like being set up for success is so important organizationally on and off the field. And it starts with that schematic piece and knowing what a guy does. Can you lean into it versus trying to make him something that he's not? And it sounds so ridiculous because I feel like people watching are going to be like, well, why would you take somebody and try to make him something that he's not? You see that all the time in sports in general, but especially in the NFL. Guys try to take a square peg and they think they'll be more valuable in a round hole, but guess what? The square don't fit in the round.
Yeah, like I use this example a lot because of how he played currently, but Jadeveon Clowney was the number 1 overall pick, not because he was a well-rounded pass rusher who could go and get you 10, 12 and a half sacks. He was a number 1 overall pick because he was an awesome run defender who could dent people and on stunts and loops. And I think for a long time in his career, they tried to make him something that he was not, which is a bend around the corner, 12 and a half sack guy. Then he gets to Baltimore with Mike McDonald, and they're saying, like, look, we don't need you to do the bend around the corner stuff. We want you to hit people in the face. And he had one of the best years of his career. So really just that nature and nurture part really is what it comes back down to. Like we said, what you'll be able to do now is what will get you in the door, like the route running, like the slot versus the outside argument, like the ability, the hands, that's going to get you on the field, that'll get you in the door. But what you can become is where we get into body types and movement skills. And that's where the coaching comes in, is like, okay, this guy might not have the best production, but this guy moves in a way that I have not seen before.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to take a swing on that because you can't teach that.
Yeah, and that's the point. Like, taking those aspects that can't be taught and then building upon them with the aspects that can in order to make a complete or dominant player at any position, aside from just wide receiver, but obviously we're talking about it here. And that's what's so fun about like the inexact science of what the draft season is, because there's so many factors and pieces that go into it and determine who and what these players become. All right, JP, last question for you. Which wide receiver or wide receivers do you think are the best fit for the Buffalo Bills? Again, for everybody playing at home, this does not include Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, because I think they would be a great fit for anyone. So they do not count. You could have another day 1 guy potentially. It could be a day 2 or day 3. It could be tiered, whatever you got. Or it could be multiple people, it could be one. Which wide receiver or wide receivers do you think are the best fit for the Buffalo Bills out of this class?
When I think about the Bills and what they need, especially at receiver, I think of an outside guy. I think of somebody who can live kind of on the edges and allow Stephon Diggs to kind of, not to say that he's getting older, but kind of age gracefully into the 1B portion of his career, where it's not like he's a dominant 1A, but he can age into being a 1B. That's something you really want to do with Stephon Diggs at this point. And with the amount of receivers that kind of can win in the slot, like that's really, you need an outside guy to complement that.
Yes.
You don't want to build your entire basketball team out of 3-and-D wings. That's how you get the Toronto Raptors. Nice. Everybody's 6'7" and can't shoot, but you also don't want to build it out of only 6'2", 6'4" guards who can shoot threes. You need a different type. So in my mock draft that I released this morning, I had the Bills taking A.D. Mitchell. I think the quintessential outside receiver that can really benefit from being in around Josh Allen is A.D. Mitchell, because of the ability not only to go get the ball vertically, but the easy separation when he's really on, when he's involved in the offense. Because again, it felt a little bit like pick a side, and there was, like we talked about earlier with Mitchell, it was very vibey with the route running.
Yep.
But you can't really just vibe in the NFL. So having him around Josh Allen is going to be a very huge thing for him to kind of help him get the consistency,
Mm,
you know. I think Xavier Legette will be really fun in this
mm,
offense. Like we said, he gets up and down the field. You
yeah.
know, you get that 4.39 speed at 6'1", 227. And
Ridiculous.
then I get 227 running a
Right,
4.39
that's what I'm
is
saying. 227 pounds running sub
real.
4.4. That is also imagine like it's not even just about like separating. Try trying to tackle that. Like you're a 190-pound or 200-pound corner or safety or whatever. You got to tackle that dude. That sucks.
Again, you think about just with Xavier Legette, you think of, oh, we can try and make AJ Brown. And we can go do that, you
Mm,
know. But I do worry a little bit about the 1 year of production. The
mm,
the drops really the drops really kind of fell off consistently from year to year, where like he kind of cut them down, I believe, in
yeah.
half this past year. But Legette would be a really fun option. I think even though he ran the slower 40, Keon Coleman will be very cool in this offense.
Ball
I
winner.
don't think he would be the vertical portion where I
Mm,
think you would have like you kind of have Khalil Shakir kind of do a little bit of that to kind of take
mm.
it'd be more of a team effort instead of just one guy kind of fully replacing the Gabe Davis role of being the downfield guy.
Fair.
But Keon Coleman can do so much after the catch and has such strong hands where you kind of give Josh Allen this guy it's a 50-50 ball, but it's more like 60-40
Yeah.
or more 70-30 in Coleman's favor. And you can say, like, okay, I can work with that. But even as we go down the draft board, you mentioned Javon Baker. I think Javon Baker would make a lot of sense as kind of a true wide receiver too
Mm,
in this offense. I don't think he would bring some of the verticality, but it look very different from Gabe
yes.
Davis.
Absolutely.
I think it'd be a different kind of verticality where he's getting separation late and kind of can be kind of a little better after the catch, where Gabe Davis was more, we're just gonna get down and go. Like you just get out, you know. But I even think to an extent, I know we kind of talked about him a little bit, but I think Troy Franklin to an extent would work here
Yeah. I mean, stretch
just
the field and
because
win vertically. That can happen.
it just opens up that
Yes.
offense. You don't want to be as congested,
Hmm.
especially as the Bills are trying to make their transition from being the deep ball or no ball. They're trying to figure out how to get to the point where Kansas City is now in terms of how
Yes.
they run their offense
Yes.
and getting to the efficiency portion of it. And you don't want to consistently build a whole team full of we can get it in 6 to 10 yard ranges because then you congest the offense a lot. You need somebody who can just get down the field. And while Troy Franklin doesn't have the best, most consistent hands, he has good ball tracking vertically. You
Yes.
know,
Fair.
he can get under the ball. What happens when he gets under the ball, like it's a little bit of a crapshoot from there. But you think about the verticality that he brings, you can make that work, especially on the outside if you want to play him there. Tez Walker is another guy who
Mm,
fits that bill of a guy who can be more of a specialist instead of a true all-around receiver. But if you think about what the Bills really need, especially with guys who can create separation in
mhm.
those 6 to 10 yard ranges like they have now with Kincaid, Stephon Diggs, and Khalil Shakir, if they just have an outside receiver who can consistently be kind of the vertical and the turn the 50-50 into 60-40, that
Yep.
would be perfect, which is why I think AD Mitchell at 28 is a very real and would be a very fun possibility here.
I love that. I Mitchell's gotten like, and again, I understand why, but I feel like he's gotten a lot of hot and cold analysis from a lot of people. And I recognize all the negatives and the cons that we've talked about in this episode, but I do like that fit. I do. He's also somebody too, I think the interview process is going to be very important for him. Like teams sitting down with him and understanding like where his mindset is, especially coming out, from the interview at the combine saying like, oh, I never really run any of my routes at full speed. Like people are going to want to know like, what's his mind like? How does he approach the game? Like his, not necessarily his love for the game, but just how he grinds on the field. And if you can tap into that or there are no red flags, yeah, with the speed, the explosion, and the ball winning downfield. It's just an aspect that would be really fun in this offense. Just you need somebody who can win one-on-one in some way, shape, or form. And Mitchell has multiple ways to do that. So I like that answer from you. JP, it's been crazy. We're almost running 2 hours. So little peek behind the curtain. I'm super sick. I've been sucking down Halls and juice and water this entire time, but we're pushing 2 hours. You've been here a while, and I'm starting to feel it. That was also the last question. I think we should wrap up and go home. But before we do that, tell everybody who you are, where they can find you, what you do. This has been another marathon performance from you. Again, you are genuinely one of my favorite people to have on the show. I love having any excuse and every excuse to talk ball with you at any point. So the floor is yours. Tell everybody who you are, what you do, where they can find you, all that stuff.
Of course. Like I said, I'm JP Acosta. You can find me at Acosta32_JP on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at JP Acosta32 on Threads. I am a football writer for SB Nation. I kind of, wherever football's being played, I'm probably there. I have a really cool story coming out this upcoming week on some combine winners and how their athletic performance translates to what we see on film and what they can be in the NFL. I believe I will be talking a little bit about Jalen Coker in there. We'll see.
Nice.
But just keep following along as I fill out the big board and as we wrap up this NFL draft process. It feels like it's gone by really quickly, but then again, we're in the beginning of March. There's still a whole lot of time left. So just follow along, see what I'm doing, see what I'm working on.
You do a great job, JP. I was talking to you offline before we went live, and I just think you've done such a good job cultivating your voice and your brand. It starts with, I think, that foundation of, actually knowing football and the X's and O's and being able to break down tape and also having an appreciation for the advanced metrics and putting it all together like you do. But just your voice and the brand that you found and created in this space where there's a ton of writers nowadays and podcasters and all this kind of stuff. And I think you've done a great job providing strong content in written form and podcast form, but also having like your spin to it and your energy and uniqueness to it. And you are genuinely one of my favorite follows. I love everything you do. So again, thank you very much for being here, joining me, and taking a large chunk of your Tuesday evening with me sitting here. I greatly appreciate it. Go enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. I'll DM you after to thank you again in a multitude of ways. But yeah, keep crushing it. You're awesome. I appreciate the hell out of you. Take care and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you. Hope you feel better.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Later, man.
See you.
JP Acosta, tremendous guest. Like he said, give him a follow on the Twitter at Acosta_32JP. I'm going to throw up the banner that says Toodles, folks. Show some more love to One Pie Pizza one more time and mention them as the sponsor of the show. The best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese. They do a ton of initiatives and drives for the community, partnering with Roswell, the Alzheimer's Foundation, the SPCA, Toys for Tots. They're good people making good food, actually good people making great food. Because again, the pizza is best in Buffalo and they do it very, very, very well. Sometimes I think that I just use the pizza as an excuse to get the blue cheese into my mouth. Like the pizza is just a vehicle for the blue cheese, but the pizza is also really good. So go check out One Pie Pizza. Again, their online menu and all their information can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. And that'll do it for us here. My nose is starting to run and I'm starting to feel not great again. I've powered through enough between Theraflu, Halls, water, and juices. Powered me through the last several hours, but I'm starting to wear down. So I'm going to go pass out and go to sleep. But I want to thank everybody for joining myself and JP on this episode. Thank you very much to everybody in the live chat, the back and forth with one another, the engagement with each other, the engagement with myself and JP. Appreciate you folks stopping by and joining us live. If you have not already, please, 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 and thank you, drop a like on this video. Again, it goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. So if you have not already, please, 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 and thank you, drop a like on this video, whether you're watching live now or watching post live later. If you are watching post live, that's cool too. Thank you very much for your view here on YouTube. Please drop a like. If you are listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool and appreciate it as well. Thank you very much for your listen and or your download. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage on whichever podcasting app and or platform you're listening to this show on. Turn on notifications for the Disguise Coverage playlist here on YouTube. Check out Cover One as a whole and all the content that we offer you folks. Myself and Eric Turner will be back in the film room tomorrow, Wednesday, March 6th, 7 7 p.m. Eastern, with film and breakdowns of a bunch of this wide receiver class and their NFL comps in a variety of ways. So it's an episode that you folks will not want to miss in any way, shape, or form. That's going to do it for me. Again, I appreciate all you folks for riding with myself and JP in this episode, whether live or post live. Thank you very much again to JP for sticking it out with me and helping me to grind through this episode. It was awesome. He is one of the best. Genuinely, if you're on Twitter, give him a follow and read his article. His articles on SB Nation. He's a brilliant writer and he really knows the game. So give him a follow. Check out his work. Godspeed to all you folks. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you tomorrow night for the Film Room, live 7 p.m. Eastern. And if not, I will see you next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, for another live episode of Disguise Coverage. But until then, again, I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.